Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chamberlain, I'd like to start with you. Let's talk for a minute about Judge Boardman and her downward departure in this case involving Justice Kavanaugh's would-be assassin. Now, as I understand it, the sentencing guidelines consistent with the underlying federal statutes recommended, as the prosecution had recommended and as the defense hadn't disputed, a range of 30 years to life. So we're talking about a range beginning with 360 months. Judge Boardman then reduced that all the way down to just 97 months, significantly shorter. I mean, that's a dramatically reduced sentence. Now, downward departures are not unheard of under the sentencing guidelines. They happen with some regularity. Nonetheless, the nature of this case is itself unusual. The nature of this case doesn't seem to be the kind of case in which you'd want a downward departure, but more to the point, her reasoning makes little sense to me. Now, in your view, did she provide any sufficient legal justification for, not just for departing, but for departing so dramatically in that case?
I mean, she provided a justification. It just certainly wasn't sufficient.
So gender identity and personal circumstances?
I mean, she made a very bizarre argument about how general deterrence doesn't really work. And she made in particular this claim that, no rational person would take a 10-year sentence to achieve a political assassination, which 4,000 years of history rebuts.
Right. Now, if that were the case, we could throw the sentencing guidelines out the door, could we not?
Sure, we don't need them at all.
Because if what she's saying is lengthy incarceration is never appropriate or rarely is appropriate because any sane, rational person, sane enough and rational enough to be guilty of committing a criminal offense, would be rationally deterred by a significantly shorter sentence. Where would be the stopping point in that?
I mean, there wouldn't be. We might see murderers regularly getting 8 to 10-year sentences, especially if, conditions were terrible because they were trans.
So in your estimation, did the judge act outside of the typical bounds of permissible judicial discretion?
Absolutely.
And go rogue?
Yeah, I think this is a rogue decision.
Now, I'm not sure the answer to this. Do you know whether the government appealed the sentencing decision, and that's now pending, I assume, before the D.C. Circuit?
Correct.
Okay. Now, given the threats, the increase in threats against government officials, including 2 significant and darn near successful attempts on the life of President Trump, then a candidate and former president, but a candidate for the presidency in 2024, and the more recent assassination of Charlie Kirk, and the rise in threats against various political officials, including but not limited to members of Congress in both houses and members of the president's cabinet and White House staff. How does a lenient sentence like this one impact the deterrence issue and the safety of those who might be affected by this kind of decision?
It sends a terrible message to would-be perpetrators. It says, you could do something as dramatic as assassinate a Supreme Court justice or fly across the country with a handgun to do it, and you'll get 8 years, maybe out in 6. I think it's just not about Republican, Democrat. It's bad for the country. It's bad for not just Supreme Court justices, but for everybody sitting here.
Now, you said earlier in your testimony that even a single grave act can be sufficient to justify impeachment and removal. What is the specific grave act here, and how might it differ, in your view, from an ordinary disagreement regarding the appropriate length of a criminal sentence?
I think it's the fact that you're treating the attempted assassination of a Supreme Court justice as a garden variety crime. Doing so weakens the judiciary, and the entire point of trying to restrict impeachment of federal judges is to protect them from improper influence and protect their independence. But if somebody's trying to kill them and a judge says, oh, that's not such a big deal, that puts federal judges at risk. So this is the rare case where impeaching a federal judge would vindicate the independence of the judiciary.
Right, because the judges themselves could also be at risk, as they have been, as Justice Kavanaugh was.
Correct.
Now, from the standpoint of institutional integrity, what message does Congress send to the judiciary, to the public, and to would-be political assailants if it ignores this conduct? In this instance, if it ignores this sentencing decision?
I mean, it says that it's not that big a deal, that it's just like any other bad decision. And I think that that's sort of, some of the arguments you're hearing coming from the other direction are, well, you shouldn't ever impeach a judge for a decision. Well, what if this judge had simply let the assassin off and freely let them go? There must be a limit to which a judicial decision can be bad enough that it justifies impeachment.
And finally, what relevance did the gender identity of the defendant, the would-be assassin of Associate Justice Brett Kavanaugh, help me understand what relevance that might have had to such a dramatic downward departure from the sentencing recommendation, not disputed or refuted by defense counsel?
Judge Boardman suggested that the gender identity meant that incarceration would be more punitive than it would be for a normal defendant, and that was her reasoning for saying that a lesser sentence could serve the aims of...
No, wait a minute. Does that mean anybody with gender identity issues would also be eligible for a significant downward departure for that reason?
I mean, if you extended this logic more broadly, yes.
Thank you.